The wind howled through the desolate streets of Hollowville as I cautiously made my way to the town square. It was late October, and the townspeople had been whispering of strange occurrences for weeks. The legend of the Pumpkin King had returned, and with it an eerie sense of foreboding had settled over our once peaceful community. As I reached the town square, my eyes were drawn to the towering figure that stood at its center, a colossal scarecrow adorned with a tattered pumpkin-headed mask. Its presence loomed like a malevolent guardian over the town. The Pumpkin King, they called it. Growing up, I had heard the stories of the Pumpkin King, tales told around campfires to frighten children. Legend had it that the king was a vengeful spirit bound to the town, cursed to return each Halloween. His fury was unleashed upon anyone who dared to celebrate the holiday, as if he resented the joy we found in it. I had always thought those stories were nothing more than local superstitions, but this year was different. This year the Pumpkin King had returned, and his presence was undeniable. The townspeople had tried to banish the legend from our midst, but it was futile. They had burnt the scarecrow, destroyed the mask, and buried the remnants in an unmarked grave, but still, he returned, as if mocking their efforts. The Pumpkin King's revenge was relentless. As I approached the sinister figure, I could hear the faint sound of laughter coming from the direction of the town's Halloween carnival. It was an odd juxtaposition, a festive celebration of the holiday in the shadow of this malevolent specter. I hesitated, considering turning back, but a sense of curiosity and defiance compelled me to press on. I wanted to unravel the mystery of the Pumpkin King once and for all. The carnival was a cacophony of flashing lights, upbeat music, and the excited chatter of children. As I wandered through the maze of colorful booths and attractions, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the unease lingered. I spotted an old fortune-teller's tent nestled in a quiet corner of the carnival. The sign above the entrance read, "Madame Zara's Mysteries." Perhaps she held the key to understanding the Pumpkin King's return. I stepped inside the dimly lit tent, the scent of incense filling my nostrils. A woman with long gray hair sat at a table covered in tarot cards, crystals, and various arcane trinkets. Her piercing blue eyes met mine as I approached. "Welcome, dear," she said in a raspy voice. "I've been expecting you." Startled, I asked, "How did you know I was coming?" Madame Zara smiled cryptically. "I see many things, child. Sit, and I will tell you what you seek to know." I took a seat across from her, my skepticism warring with my growing fascination. She shuffled the tarot cards and laid them out in a spread. "The Pumpkin King," she began, "a spirit of vengeance, bound to this town by ancient magic. He returns each Halloween, seeking retribution for a grievous wrong committed long ago." I leaned in closer, my heart pounding. What wrong? What happened to cause this curse? Madame Zara's eyes darkened. "A great injustice was done, a betrayal that shattered the spirit of the Pumpkin King. He was once a guardian of this town, a protector of its people. But when he needed them most, they turned their backs on him." I struggled to make sense of her words. "How do we break the curse? How do we stop the Pumpkin King?" Madame Zara's voice dropped to a whisper. "To break the curse, one must uncover the truth, the hidden betrayal that binds the Pumpkin King to this town. Only then can his rage be appeased." My mind raced with questions, but before I could ask more, Madame Zara suddenly gasped, her eyes going wide with terror. "He's here," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "The Pumpkin King is here." I followed her gaze to the entrance of the tent, where a chilling presence had filled the air. The flap of the tent billowed, and a cold wind swept through the room. The candles flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. I fumbled for my phone and turned on its flashlight, revealing a horrifying sight. The Pumpkin King stood before us, his towering frame casting a menacing shadow. His pumpkin mask was carved with a sinister grin, and his straw-stuffed arms reached out like skeletal branches. Madame Zara and I were frozen in fear as the Pumpkin King's hollow gaze bore into our souls. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he extended a bony finger and pointed at Madame Zara. "You," he hissed, his voice a spectral whisper. "You know the truth." The old fortune-teller trembled as she nodded. "I do." The Pumpkin King turned his gaze to me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "And you," he intoned, "you seek the truth." I could only manage a weak nod, my voice stolen by fear. With a sudden burst of motion, the Pumpkin King swept his arm across the table, sending tarot cards and trinkets flying. Then he reached out and touched Madame Zara's forehead. She let out a blood-curdling scream as her eyes rolled back and her body went limp. I watched in horror as the life drained from her form withering like a dried husk until she crumbled to dust. The Pumpkin King turned away from the now empty chair, his mission seemingly fulfilled. As he began to fade into the shadows, I summoned the courage to speak. "Wait. What is the truth? What do I need to know?" The Pumpkin King paused, his pumpkin mask tilting slightly. "Seek the old oak tree at the edge of the woods. There you will find the answers you seek." And with that, he disappeared into the night, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stumbled out of the tent, my heart racing and my mind filled with dread. I had a choice to make: to heed the Pumpkin King's cryptic message and venture into the woods, or flee from the curse that now loomed over me and my town. But I couldn't turn away from the truth. The fate of Hollowville depended on uncovering the ancient betrayal that had bound the Pumpkin King to our town. And I was determined to face whatever horrors awaited me in the heart of the forest. I ventured into the heart of the forest, guided by the cryptic message of the Pumpkin King. The old oak tree stood sentinel at the edge of the woods, its ancient branches gnarled and twisted. Beneath its roots, I discovered a hidden chamber, where the truth lay waiting. Within the chamber's depths, I uncovered a forgotten journal, its pages recounting a tale of betrayal and sacrifice. It spoke of a time when the town had turned its back on the guardian of the harvest, condemning him to a life of eternal torment. As I read, I realized that the only way to appease the Pumpkin King's rage was to seek forgiveness for the town's long-forgotten sins. With the journal in hand, I returned to Hollowville, determined to confront the dark legacy that had bound the Pumpkin King to our town. The townspeople listened as I revealed the truth, and together we vowed to make amends for the sins of our ancestors. In an ancient ceremony held beneath the very scarecrow that had once embodied the spirit of vengeance, we begged forgiveness and offered our gratitude for the bountiful harvests that had sustained us. As the last words of the ritual were spoken, a hush fell over the crowd, and the Pumpkin King's presence began to fade. His malevolent spirit dissipated like mist in the morning sun, and with a final mournful sigh, he was gone, leaving behind a town forever changed. In the years that followed, Hollowville thrived, and the legend of the Pumpkin King became a distant memory. But we never forgot the lessons we had learned, that sometimes the past holds the key to our future, and forgiveness can be the most powerful magic of all.
The crisp autumn air cut through the forest as I trudged deeper into the woods. My breaths misted in the cold, and my heart pounded with a mix of trepidation and curiosity. I had heard whispers of the witch's cabin, a place hidden away from civilization where dark secrets and forbidden knowledge were said to reside. Today, driven by a restless spirit, I would uncover the truth. The path I followed was narrow, overgrown with gnarled roots and thick underbrush. The trees leaned in ominously, their branches tangled like skeletal fingers. I could almost sense their warning, as if they knew the perils that lay ahead. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled upon a clearing, and there it was, a decrepit cabin, nestled in a small glade. The structure was made of rotting wood, the windows long shattered and the roof caved in. Vines and thorns had claimed the cabin as their own, weaving a web of vegetation around it. As I approached, the air grew heavy with an unnatural stillness, and a shiver ran down my spine. The witch's cabin was said to be a place of curses and dark enchantments, but I couldn't turn back now. I had come too far. I stepped cautiously over the threshold, my footsteps echoing through the dilapidated interior. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint scent of herbs. The room was cluttered with shelves lined with bottles, jars, and strange, unidentifiable objects. In the center, a crooked wooden table held a collection of tattered books, their pages filled with cryptic symbols and incantations. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as I surveyed the room. It was as if the very walls held memories of the secrets whispered within these decaying walls. My attention was drawn to a faded tapestry that hung on one wall. It depicted a woman with long, raven-black hair and piercing green eyes. A portrait of the witch herself, I presumed. Beneath the image, a message was embroidered in an ancient script: "Seek knowledge, but beware the price." With a deep breath, I reached out and pulled one of the dusty books from the table. Its leather cover felt brittle and fragile in my hands. The title was in a language I couldn't decipher, But as I opened it, I found that the pages were filled with illustrations of plants, animals, and constellations, each annotated with arcane symbols and notes. Hours turned into days as I lost myself in the pages of the book, translating the cryptic text and deciphering the rituals and spells. It was as if the very knowledge contained within these pages called out to me, beckoning me to uncover its secrets. On the third day of my stay in the witch's cabin, I was startled by a sound, a low, mournful wail that echoed through the woods. It sent a chill down my spine and pulled me from my studies. I rushed to the broken window and peered out into the darkening forest. There, in the fading light, I saw her, the witch herself, her raven-black hair flowing in the wind as she moved gracefully among the trees. She was ethereal, like a specter, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. My heart pounded as I watched her. What was she doing here, and why had she returned? Had she sensed an intruder in her sanctuary? The answer came in the form of another sound, an ominous, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath me. I turned back to the room and saw the symbols on the pages of the book glowing with an eerie, greenish light. I realized with a jolt of horror that I had unwittingly activated one of the spells within the book. The very knowledge I sought now threatened to consume me. Desperation overcame me as I frantically flipped through the pages, searching for a way to undo the spell. But it was too late. The room itself began to tremble, and the walls seemed to close in on me. Outside, the witch continued her ritual, her chants growing louder and more frantic. The growling beneath me intensified, and the ground shook violently. I stumbled to the door, determined to escape the impending catastrophe. But as I reached for the handle, the cabin itself seemed to come alive, its wooden beams contorting and twisting to block my way. I was trapped. The witch's chanting reached a crescendo, and the ground split open beneath me. I fell, tumbling into a dark underground chamber. The fall knocked the breath from my lungs, and I lay there, dazed and disoriented. As my vision cleared, I realized I was not alone. In the dim light, I saw figures, shadowy spectral forms that moved with an otherworldly grace. They surrounded me, their eyes devoid of emotion. The witch's voice echoed from above, her incantations resonating through the chamber. The figures began to chant in response, their voices a haunting chorus that seemed to seep into my very soul. I knew then that I had stumbled into something far more ancient and powerful than I could have ever imagined. I was not a mere intruder. I was a pawn in a dark and ancient game. As the chanting continued, I closed my eyes and reached deep within myself, searching for a source of strength I never knew I possessed. With every ounce of willpower, I fought against the enchantment that sought to bind me. The ground trembled once more, and a blinding light filled the chamber. The spectral figures wailed in anguish as they dissolved into nothingness. The witch's voice faltered, and the spell was broken. I gasped for breath as the chamber collapsed around me. The walls crumbled, and the earth itself seemed to swallow me whole. When I awoke, I found myself lying on the forest floor, the witch's cabin reduced to nothing more than a pile of rubble. The sun had risen, and the forest was bathed in the soft light of morning. I knew then that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. The witch's cabin had tested my resolve and revealed the darkness that dwelled within me. The knowledge I had sought was not worth the price it demanded. With a heavy heart, I turned away from the ruins of the cabin and made my way back through the forest, vowing never to seek the forbidden knowledge that had nearly consumed me. The witch's warning had been clear. Seek knowledge, but beware the price. It was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my days, a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the pursuit of power and secrets better left buried.